We'll tear your soul apart.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and in this installment of Versus, we're comparing the 1980s and 1990s to see which reigned supreme as the better decade for horror movies.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
We're gonna get you, not another piece.
You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, understand?
We're going to consider the horror trends for each decade, the best heroes, and of course, the best villains to help determine which decade was stronger overall. Which era of horror haunts your dreams the most? Let us know in the comments. Round 1. Villains. You can't have a good horror movie without a good antagonist. In some cases, the bad guys and girls are so compelling, we kind of hope they get away with it. This is especially true if the people they're chasing down are particularly insufferable, as is the case with many 80s slashers. But the 80s still provided us with some unforgettable villains.
Please, God.
This is God.
For one, it marked the arrival of A Nightmare on Elm Street's Freddy Krueger, and the Friday the 13th series' Jason Voorhees, who would face off in the 2000s. While he was introduced in 1978's Halloween, Michael Myers still saw plenty of bloody action in the 80s. And let's not forget the start of the Hellraiser franchise and the introduction of Pinhead, or Jack Nicholson's unhinged performance in The Shining.
I'm not gonna hurt you.
Stay away from me!
Wendy,
Stay away!
darling, light of my life. I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Slasher doll Chucky was introduced in 1988's Child's Play, but we consider him more of a 90s symbol.
Just like the good old days. Nothing like a strangulation to get the circulation going.
Other great 90s villains include Scream's Ghostface, Candyman, and of course, Hannibal Lecter.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Kathy Bates' frightening work as Annie Wilkes in Misery is another great Oscar-winning horror performance from this decade.
You did it! You did it! You did it! You did it! You murdered my misery!
Annie!
Although the 90s has plenty of quality evil, we have to give this round to the 80s for how enduring these villains have been and how many films they've spawned. 80s 1, 90s 0.
1 down, 2 to go.
Round 2. Heroes. Never underestimate the importance of a protagonist in a horror movie. Without someone to identify with and root for, a horror movie can be nothing more than an excuse for blood and guts.
Michael, stop!
Two strong examples of horror heroes, or in this case heroines, are Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween 2, and Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp in A Nightmare on Elm Street and Dream Warriors.
Mine now, Piggy.
On the male side of things, Bruce Campbell's performance as Ash in the Evil Dead films has rightfully made him a horror legend.
Groovy.
The strong horror heroine trend continued in the 90s.
Freeze! Put your hands over your head and turn around. Spread your legs. Spread your legs. Put your hands in the back. Thumbs up. Freeze!
Jodie Foster won an Oscar for her role as FBI agent Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs, and Neve Campbell's performance as Sidney Prescott helped to ground the Scream franchise.
In your dreams.
We also rooted for Bruce Willis and Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense, as well as the students lost in the woods in The Blair Witch Project.
God! No. Oh, no.
You gotta be kidding me! This is a joke!
No.
This is another close call, but we have to go with the 90s for taking the seeds that the 80s planted and growing them even further. These performances aren't always the flashiest ones, and that's what makes them so strong. They give us something to latch onto as we enter these worlds of unknowable and unthinkable horrors. 80s one, 90s one.
How do you feel? Can you tell us what you saw? Can you tell us about what happened in there?
Sydney, can you tell us how it feels to be a hero?
Round 3. Scare factor.
What's that?
Being chased by a masked psychopath with a sharp object is certainly scary to imagine or experience. However, it can occasionally get a little tedious if not done right. 80s slashers like A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th weren't scary because they involved brutal death scenes. They were scary because they understood how to use suspense to build terror with an audience.
No, please, no! 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 Please, no!
Unfortunately, there are plenty of forgettable slashers that only cared about gore and not about thrills. The 90s took things in a more psychological direction, but that still provided plenty of frights.
You got what you deserved.
He's alive! He's alive!
Seven told the story of an unrelenting maniac from the perspective of two detectives trying to track him down. The Blair Witch Project focused on our fear of the unseen to terrifying effect. And while Hannibal Lecter might be best known for eating people, he is a former psychiatrist, and part of his scare factor comes from how well he can manipulate people, even when they think they're safe from him.
You wake up in the dark and hear the screaming of the lamb.
We always appreciate horror that makes us think more than they make us wince. The 90s wins this round for giving us multiple examples of great horror movies that skimp on the blood and deliver on the brains. 80s 1, 90s 2.
You fly back to school now, little starling. Fly, fly, fly.
Round 4, originality. A new take on horror is all too rare, with too many studios just trying to cash in on whatever's hot. The best horror films of the 80s were the ones that brought us new takes on the genre and kicked off some very enduring franchises.
Nancy! Help me, please! Save me from...
Freddy!
Can you imagine horror today without the influence of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th and The Evil Dead, as well as their associated characters?
You will die! Like the others before you. One by one we will take you.
But we also appreciate how the 90s took horror in a new direction.
So, Mr. Originality, how would you make it different?
I'd let the geek get the girl.
One of the best examples of the old influencing the new is in the Scream series. Here, Elm Street director Wes Craven deconstructed some of the tropes he helped to popularize.
Never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back.
The Blair Witch Project showed us just how scary found footage horror could be, and The Sixth Sense delivered a meditation on grief and letting go, disguised as a ghost story.
I think I can go now. Just needed to do a couple things.
The 80s wins this round because of how many amazing series started this decade. There have been reboots of so many 80s franchises because studios recognize how valuable these properties are and how enduring the characters are. This decade truly feels like a game-changing one when it comes to the ingenuity in horror movies. 80s 2, 90s 2.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications.
Round 5. Overall quality. This is probably the hardest round of them all. Both the 80s and 90s have contributed some of the finest horror films of all time.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
80s, we have outstanding chillers like A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Thing, The Shining, and The Evil Dead. If you don't like any of these movies, you simply don't like horror. If you've seen those and are looking for some more great 80s horror, we recommend Poltergeist, The Fly, and Reanimator.
You killed him! No, I did not. I gave him life.
But horror in the 90s was anything but a step down. The Silence of the Lambs Best Picture win showed that horror deserved to be treated just as seriously as any other genre.
You're very frank, Clarice. I think it would be quite something to know you in private life.
Meanwhile, Scream was a sharp satire that still worked as a traditional slasher, and the Blair Witch Project showed how much tension could be created with a camcorder.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
Other 90s horror films we love include Kronos, Brain Dead, and Candyman.
Be my victim.
You can't go wrong with either decade, but when it comes to overall movie quality, we have to give it to the 90s. In addition to the ones that we've already mentioned, we still get shivers watching J-horror classics like Ringu, Oscar winners like Misery, and even remakes that arguably live up to the original, like Night of the Living Dead. And we're sure they'll hold up for decades to come. 80s 2, 90s 3. It was a close race, but the 90s ekes out on victory for horror movie supremacy.
Don't with the Chuck.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.